Welcome back to my channel. I think I fixed our audio problem. Finally. I've messed with this thing trying to get it right. I've googled the settings and just... Anyway, I hope you can hear me okay, and hopefully we'll be, not struggling to do this anymore. So tonight I have another unsolved mystery for you. It's probably not a new one. It's probably one that you've heard several times. It is not one that I've seen on an ASMR channel. And I apologize if you catch me looking this way. I have my TV going while I'm filming, and I have to watch my hockey team. So it's on mute, so you won't hear anything. But anyway, so we are going to talk about the Sodder children. I think I'm pronouncing that right. I googled it, but I couldn't find any explanation of how you say it, so hopefully that's right. I'm just gonna jump right in because there's a lot of, I have 5 pages, typed pages of stuff. I'm gonna try to slow down because somebody mentioned that that would be better for your tingles. So I'm gonna try. Anyway, let's get going. George Sodder was born with the name Giorgio Sodder in Tula, Sardinia, Italy in 1895. He immigrated to the United States 13 years later with an older brother who went back home as soon as both he and George had cleared customs at Ellis Island. For the rest of his life, George Sodder, as he became known, would not talk very much about why he left his homeland. Sodder eventually found work on the railroads of Pennsylvania. He carried water and other supplies to workers, and after a few years took a more permanent position in Smithers, West Virginia, as a driver. After a few more years, started his own trucking company, first hauling dirt to fill construction sites and later coal that was mined in the region. Jenny Cipriani, a storekeeper's daughter there, who had also come to the U.S. from Italy in her childhood, became his wife. They settled nearby in Fayetteville, which had a large population of Italian immigrants, in a 2-story timber frame house 2 miles north of town. In 1923, they had their first of 10 children. George's business prospered, and they became one of the most respected middle-class families around, according to one local official. However, he had strong opinions about many subjects and was not shy about expressing them, and sometimes alienating people. Talking about George. In particular, his strident opposition to the Italian dictator Benito Mussolini had led to some strong arguments with other members of the immigrant community. The last of these Sodder children, Sylvia, was born in 1943. I'm just going to pause here for a second. Can you imagine having 10 children in the span of 20 years? Your oldest child is 20 years older than your youngest child. You'll never be done raising kids. Anyway, sorry, I just thought that was you don't really see that in this day and age anymore. Okay, sorry. By then, the second oldest son, Joe, had left home to serve in the military during World War II. The following year, Mussolini was deposed and executed. However, George Sodder's criticism of the late dictator had left some hard feelings. In October of 1945, a visiting life insurance salesman, after being rebuffed, warned George that his house would go up in smoke and that his children were going to be destroyed. usual bedtime. At 10 p.m., Jenny told them they could stay up a little later as long as the two oldest boys who were still awake. 14-year-old Maurice and his 9-year-old brother Louis remembered to put the cows in and feed the chickens before going to bed themselves. Her husband and the two oldest boys, John, age 23, and George, age 16, had spent the day working with their father, and they were already sound asleep. After reminding the children of those remaining chores, she took Sylvia, age 2, upstairs with her and went to bed herself. The telephone rang at 12:30 a.m. Jenny woke and went downstairs to answer it. It was a woman whose voice she did not recognize, asking for a name that she wasn't familiar with the sound of laughter and clinking glasses in the background. She informed the caller that she'd reached a wrong number, later recalling the woman's weird laugh. She hung up and returned to bed. As she did this, she noticed the lights were still on and the curtains were not drawn. These are two things that the children normally attended to when they stayed up later than their parents. Marion had fallen asleep on the living room couch, so Jenny assumed the other children had stayed up later had gone back to the attic where they slept. She closed the curtains, turned out the light, and returned to bed. At 1 a.m., Jenny was again awakened by a sound of an object hitting the house's roof with a loud bang, and then a rolling noise. After hearing nothing further, she went back to sleep. After another half an hour, she woke up again, smelling smoke. When she got up again, she found that the room George used for his office was on fire. Around the telephone line and the fuse box. She woke him up, and he in turn woke the two older sons. Both parents and 4 of the children, Marion, Sylvia, John, and George Jr., escaped the house. They frantically yelled to the children upstairs, but heard no response. They could not go up there as the stairway itself was already aflame. John Sodder said in his first police interview after the fire that he went up to the attic to alert his siblings sleeping there, although later he changed his story to say that he only called up there and did not actually see them. Efforts to find aid and rescue the children were pretty unexpectedly complicated. The phone didn't work, so Marion, the oldest daughter, ran to a neighbor's to call the fire department. A driver on a nearby road had also seen the flames and called from a tavern. They were unsuccessful either because they could not reach the operator or because the phone there turned out to be broken. Neither the neighbor or the passing motorist was, Either the neighbor or the passing motorist was eventually successful in reaching the fire department from another phone in the center of town. George, who was barefoot, climbed the wall and broke open an attic window. He cut his arm in the process. He and his sons intended to use a ladder to the attic to rescue the other children, but it wasn't in its usual spot resting against the house and couldn't be found anywhere nearby. A water barrel that could have been used to extinguish the fire was frozen solid. George then tried to pull both of the trucks that he used in his business up to the house and use them to climb to the attic window, but neither one of them would start, despite having worked perfectly the previous day. At this point, your house burn completely to the ground and have nothing left is a terrible, terrible occurrence. But then for you to believe that your 5 children or siblings perished in this fire, I like it. Okay. The fire department was low on manpower due to the war and relying on individual firefighters to call each other. They did not respond until later that morning, somewhere around 8 a.m. It's 7 hours later. I know this was, 1945, but 7 hours to let a house burn. Anyway, Chief F.J. Morris said the next day that the already slow response was further hampered by his inability to drive the fire truck, requiring that he wait until someone who could drive was available. It's because he was drunk. That's awesome. If you're in charge, you shouldn't be drunk. I'm sorry. Anyway, I'm being judgy. The firefighters, one of whom was a brother of Jenny's, could do little but look through the ashes that were left of the Sodders' basement. By 10 a.m., Morris told the Sodders they had not found any bones, as might have been expected if the other children had been in the house if it burned. According to another account, they did find a few bone fragments and internal organs, but chose not to tell the family. It has also been noted by modern fire professionals that their search was that's not long enough to search for anything. It's cursory at best. Nevertheless, Morris believed that the 5 children that were unaccounted for died in the fire, suggesting that it had been hot enough to burn their bodies completely. The fire chief told George to leave the site undisturbed so the state fire marshal could conduct a more thorough investigation. However, after 4 days, George and Jenny could not bear the site anymore. So George bulldozed 5 feet of dirt over the site with the intention of converting it to a memorial garden for their lost children. The local coroner convened an inquest the next day, which held that the fire was an accident caused by faulting wiring. I'm gonna put quotes there. Among the jurors was a man who had threatened George that his house would be burned down and his children destroyed in retribution for his anti-Mussolini remarks. Death certificates for the 5 children were issued on December 30th. The local newspaper my goodness, I should really just stop reading and just memorize. Contradicted itself, stating that all the bodies had been found, but then later in the same story said that only part of one body was recovered. George and Jenny Sodder were too grief-stricken to attend the funeral that they had on January 2nd, 1946, although the surviving children did go. So of course, not long afterwards, as they began to rebuild their lives, the Sodders started to question the official findings about the fire. They wondered why, if it had been caused by an electrical problem, the Christmas lights had remained on throughout the fire's early stages, when the power should have gone out. They then found the ladder that had been missing from the side of the house at the bottom of an embankment 75 feet away. A telephone repairman told the Sodders that the house phone line had not been burned through in the fire as they initially thought, but cut by someone who had been willing and able to climb 14 feet up a pole and reach 2 feet away from it to do so. she started burning small piles of animal bones to see if they would be completely gone. And none ever were. I'm sorry, I have this tickle and it won't go away. An employee of a local crematorium she contacted told her that the human bones would remain even after bodies were burned at 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit, which is 1,090 degrees Celsius, for 2 hours. This was far longer and hotter than the house fire could have been. So the Sodder's truck's failure to start was also considered. George believed that they had been tampered with, perhaps by the same man who stole the block and tackle and cut the phone line. However, one of his sons-in-laws told the Charleston Gazette-Mail in 2013 that he'd come to believe that Sodder and his sons might have, in their haste to start the trucks, flooded the engines. I feel like if there was something wrong with the truck, if you couldn't get it to start, it wouldn't start that afternoon. You could have figured out what was wrong with it, whether it was the battery or someone had pulled the cables or, whatever. I guess you could have flooded the engine if you were trying to get to your 5 children. Although, I feel like it would be kind of odd for you both to do it. Like, I feel like one of the trucks would have started, but maybe not the other. In reality, they only needed one, and neither one worked, unfortunately. So some accounts have suggested that the wrong number phone call might have somehow been connected to the fire and the disappearance of the children. However, investigators later located the woman who made the call, and she confirmed that it had just been a wrong number on her part. So here are some subsequent developments in the case. As spring approached, the Sodders, as they said they would, planted flowers in the soil that was bulldozed over the house. Jenny tended it carefully for the rest of her life. However, further developments in 1946 reinforced the family's belief that the children they were memorializing might in fact be alive somewhere. There was evidence that supported their belief that the fire had not been started in the electrical system and was instead set deliberately. The driver of the bus that passed through Fayetteville late Christmas Eve said he had seen some people throwing balls of fire at a house. A few months later, when the snow had melted, Sylvia found a small, dark green rubber ball-like object in the brush nearby. George, recalling his wife's account, rumors circulated around Fayetteville that Morris had afterwards admitted the box with the liver had indeed not come from the fire. He had supposedly placed it there in the hopes that the Sodders would find it and be satisfied that the missing children had indeed died in the fire. So I'm going to stop and just discuss for a minute. Even if I had lost 5 children in a fire, and I found one, let's just pretend one heart in a box or on the site or whatever, that still doesn't tell me where my other 4 children are. And it sounds to me like Jenny is, she's not gonna let it rest until she finds out. Anyway, so in 1949, they did an excavation of the site, but there were a couple other things, so we're gonna talk about that first. George did not wait for reports of sightings to come in. Sometimes he made them himself. After seeing a girl in a magazine who, it was pictures of young ballet dancers in New York City, he said she looked like Betty, one of his missing daughters. He drove all the way to the ballet school, where he repeatedly demanded to see this girl and was refused. He also tried to interest the FBI in investigating what he considered a kidnapping. Director J. Edgar Hoover personally responded to his letters. Although I would like to be of service, the matter related appears to be of local character and doesn't come within the investigative jurisdiction of this bureau. If the local authorities requested the bureau's assistance, he added, he would of course direct agents to assist, but the Fayetteville police and fire departments had declined to do so. Pretty cool that J. Edgar Hoover responded. Not that that finds him his kids, but anyway, back to In August of 1949, George was able to persuade Oscar Hunter, a Washington, D.C. pathologist, to supervise a new search through the dirt at the site. That's what I was talking about, another excavation. After a very thorough search, artifacts including a dictionary that had belonged to the children and some coins were found. Several bone fragments were unearthed and determined to be human vertebrae. They were sent to Marshall T. Newman, a specialist at the Smithsonian. They were confirmed to be lumbar vertebrae. So, in your back, you probably don't care, but I'm going to explain it anyway because I'm medical. You have 3 sections of vertebrae. You have C in the middle, you have T, and down at the bottom you have L. So lumbar, lower, down real low by your pelvis and your hips. Anyway, it doesn't matter. And they were from, oh my gosh, they Route 60 near Anstead with the same information. It would in time become a landmark for traffic through Fayetteville on US Route 19. Their efforts soon brought another reported sighting of the children after the fire. Ida Crutchfield, a woman who ran a Charleston hotel, claimed to have seen the children approximately 1 week afterward. Quote, "I do not remember the exact date," she said in a statement. The children had come in around midnight with 2 men and 2 women, all of whom appeared to her to be of Italian extraction. When she attempted to speak with the children, one of the men looked at me in a hostile manner. He turned around and began rapidly talking in Italian, and immediately the whole party stopped talking to me. End quote. She recalled that they left the hotel early the next morning. Investigators today do not, however, consider her story credible, as she had only first seen photos of the children 2 years after the fire, 5 years before she came forward. Like I talked before, George came up and followed leads in person, traveling to the areas where the tips had come from. A woman from St. Louis claimed that Martha was being held in a convent. Here. I'm not going to say there because that's how I typed it, but it's here. Oh, hey, we scored. I love it when that happens. Anyway, a bar patron in Texas claimed to have overheard 2 people making incriminating statements about a fire that happened on Christmas Eve in West Virginia some years before. None of those proved significant. When George later heard that a relative of Jenny's in Florida those years and were aware that their parents and siblings had survived too. The family believes they may have avoided contact in order to keep them from harm. As of 2015, Sylvia Sodder Paxton, the youngest of the family, is the only one still alive of the surviving children in the house on the night of the fire, which she says is her earliest memory. I was the last one of the kids to leave home, she recalled to the Gazette Mail in 2013. She and her father often stayed up late talking about what might have happened. I experienced their grief for a long time. She still believes that her siblings survived that night, and she quietly assists with the efforts to find them and publicize the case. Her daughter said in 2006, she promised my grandparents she wouldn't let the story die, and that she would do everything she could. I can't, this story is so complicated. I'm sorry, I'm just gonna shift you around here a little, because I have to move. Now we might be drunk, but that's okay. We're a lot crooked. I'm not gonna talk too much because I don't want this video to be really long, but it's already pretty long. What the heck? Let's just talk about the night of the fire first. Okay, weird phone call has been written out. Ladder was 75 feet away. Phone line cut so they couldn't call for help. Fire chief drunk, can't come for help. Trucks don't work. Water basin frozen. What else did I forget? Too many things. I don't believe in coincidences. I think that everything happens for a reason. And I find it really odd that the ladder was 75 feet away. Neither truck worked, although I haven't found out why neither truck worked, where the battery cables pulled, etc., etc. No bones. Something weird about the fire chief burying body parts there. This case just really stuck